Be me, Caleb. 31, quiet office guy who lives on calendars and hates surprises. My younger sister Mara, 26, has the kind of confidence that fills a room before she does. Rent jumped, her lease died, and my spare room became the smart temporary solution. To her, it was resource optimization because independent women don't struggle, they strategize. I shrugged because family is family, and I didn't feel like fighting over vocabulary. The first month was normal roommate friction, with a sibling twist and a lot of takeout. During the day, it was marketing at a small agency, plus freelance gigs she hunted after hours. My job was steady corporate glue, spreadsheets, meetings, and being dependable on purpose. Most nights we existed in the same space. 2 screens, 2 tired brains, 1 weak lamp. One evening she slid her laptop over and asked for a real quick check. The email was short, but the tone had teeth, like she expected a battle in reply. I softened 2 lines, fixed a date, and swapped one phrase that sounded like a threat. After she read it, she smiled and claimed she knew it was fine, just wanted a second pair of eyes. The next day she asked again, and the day after that, and it became our background routine. Sometimes it was a client email, sometimes a proposal, sometimes a calendar invite with time zones. I didn't think of it as charity because it felt like passing a wrench across a bench. I'm not a writer. I'm just careful, and careful prevents small fires from becoming real smoke. Mara would hit send, get a friendly reply, and walk away like the outcome was inevitable. After a while, the thank yous faded, not out of cruelty, but out of habit and momentum. My edits became invisible like the way you stop noticing the floor until it's gone. If I looked tired, she'd say it would take 2 seconds, like my time was free forever. I kept doing it because she was my sister and I wanted her to win without bruises. Some nights she'd wake me up with that half-laugh, half-plea voice and a glowing screen in her hand. The request was always framed as tiny, but the draft always arrived carrying a whole mood problem. I'd change, as I already told you, into just a quick reminder, and suddenly the world stayed calm. I'd swap "this is basic" into "happy to clarify," and her client stopped sounding like an enemy. Little fixes like that never look heroic, but they prevent the kind of friction that sticks to your name. Mara started calling it my superpower, then stopped calling it anything at all. Late at night, I'd watch her type with the speed of anger, then hand it to me like it was normal. My edits were slow and boring, but they kept her from sounding like she was picking a fight. The weird part was how fast she got used to the safety of it, like she forgot it was borrowed. When something went well, she credited her confidence, and when something went wrong, she blamed men. If I hinted that maybe her tone caused a mess, she'd say I was defending the system or minimizing her truth. Then her vocabulary changed, slowly at first, like a playlist shifting genres without warning. Feminism stopped being something she read and became something she wore like armor every day. Every story turned into a lesson. Every annoyance turned into evidence. Every disagreement turned into men. It started as jokes, the kind that sound harmless when you say them with a laugh. She'd say men are allergic to details while I fixed her details in real time. She'd mock men for forgetting attachments while I attached her file that she forgot. She'd say women always do the invisible work while I sat there doing invisible work. Pushing back felt pointless because Mara didn't debate. She performed, and performance hates pauses. I told myself it was a phase because everyone picks up new language and overuses it. The problem was the overuse became a worldview, and the worldview started erasing reality. Lists of red flags showed up, and she laughed when I asked if any of those flags applied to her too. Online, she posted threads about being exhausted from educating men while I edited her client email beside her. Sometimes she'd read her own posts out loud, watching my face for a reaction like it was a test. If I stayed neutral, she called it emotional avoidance, and if I frowned, she called it defensiveness. The apartment slowly filled with that feeling you get in a meeting when someone's waiting to catch you. I started speaking less at home, not because I was scared, but because talking turned into a debate track. Meanwhile, she treated her certainty like proof she was growing, even when it was just making her harsher. It wasn't that she wanted to be cruel. It was that she wanted to be right more than she wanted peace. In her mouth, strong and independent, sounded like a rank she earned in battle. In public, she refused help with the smile, then asked for the same help at home. If I noticed the contradiction, she'd say I didn't understand context or lived experience. Calls with our mom got awkward because Mara bragged about doing everything alone on speaker. Meanwhile, I'd be 2 feet away, rewriting her proposal, turning sharp edges into clean lines. Credit wasn't what I wanted, but hearing your work erased does something to your patience. As freelancing grew, her tone sharpened, like success made her less careful and more certain. Clients asked simple questions, and she answered like they were challenging her authority. Then she'd ask me to polish the follow-up, because professional meant less spiky. One night, after a late call, she tossed her phone at me and said to make it sound serious. The draft was a victory lap wrapped around a subtle insult, dressed up as confidence. I rewrote it into calm competence because calm gets paid and conflict gets ghosted. Once it was sent, a nice reply came back, and she laughed that this is why she keeps me around. Meant as teasing, it still landed like a label, like I was a tool she owned. From that point, the apartment felt less like home and more like a little office with no paycheck. Soon, boundaries became her hammer, and tone policing became her shield. If someone asked for clarity, she accused them of trying to silence a strong woman. If someone disliked her bluntness, she said they couldn't handle standards or accountability. I heard enough calls to notice the friction wasn't accidental anymore, it was her default mode. The more pushback she got, the more she believed she was doing something brave. My role stayed the same, which meant I kept catching sparks before they lit the curtains. Then life handed us perfect timing, because it loves doing that when you're barely holding on. Mara landed a steady retainer client, the kind she chased for months, and she was glowing. On calls, she paced the living room, pitch voice on, laugh ready, promises stacked high. The client asked for timelines and deliverables, and I heard her hesitate for half a second. Then she guessed confidently, because confidence was her favorite shortcut through uncertainty. After the call, she asked me to check the follow-up email like always. The draft had the wrong date, the wrong attachment, and a line that sounded annoyed. I fixed it quietly, and she didn't look embarrassed because embarrassment requires humility. Instead, she laughed and said, "Clients nitpick women to feel powerful, especially men." I stared at her and she slapped on the sticker line, "Not you," like it fixed the generalization. That "not you" started happening constantly, a bandage over a wound she refused to treat. The real trigger arrived at a family dinner. because dinners make people careless with their masks. Mara was glowing again, telling the retainer story like a keynote speech. Our mom smiled, our dad nodded, and everyone did the polite, supportive thing. Then she said it louder, laughing, that you can't trust men with details, they always mess it up. At dinner, the fork became a pointer, and she aimed it at me while smiling. Even Caleb helps, she said, because men need supervision, and I'm not ashamed of that. The room laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughter patches awkward gaps. Something in my chest went quiet, clean, like a breaker flipping off. It wasn't anger, it wasn't heat, it wasn't a speech forming in my throat. It was clarity, the kind that shows up when you stop making excuses for someone. It wasn't a cute joke, it was her using me as evidence for the world view. My help was allowed to exist only as proof that men are useless without a woman guiding them. I finished dinner, kept my face neutral, and let everyone go home comfortable. On the drive back, she kept talking about her win, and I kept nodding like a passenger. That night, she asked for another quick check as if nothing had happened. The email on her screen was full of spikes, subtle digs dressed up as confidence. Old me would have cleaned it automatically because habit is strong and peace is addictive. New me remembered the fork, the smile, and the word supervision said like a joke. I handed the phone back without changing a word and said it looked fine. A frown showed up and she asked why I didn't fix anything this time. I shrugged like it genuinely didn't matter because I wanted the truth to be simple. She sent it as is because she trusts herself more than feedback when she's feeling righteous. Next morning, she stood in the kitchen reading a reply with coffee steaming. I didn't see the screen, but I watched her face shift from smug to irritated. Under her breath, she muttered that the client misread her tone, like tone is someone else's responsibility. A courtroom-style response appeared, and she asked me to check it. I said it seemed fine because I wasn't stepping back into the role I'd been drafted into. Another message arrived later asking for clarity, polite but colder, and she called it controlling. That evening, she asked me to look at an invoice draft, and I spotted two obvious issues. The date was wrong, and one line item didn't match what she promised on the call. My fingers twitched to fix it because the reflex doesn't die quickly. I handed it back unchanged and said it looked fine. For a long second she stared, like she could feel the shift but couldn't name it without admitting dependence. Pride won and it went out anyway because pride is cheaper than honesty in the moment. 2 days later she complained that the client was picky and exhausting. I nodded while eating dinner and felt oddly calm, like I'd finally stepped off a treadmill. Week by week, the mistake stayed small but constant, like dripping water behind a wall. A client asked for a simple revision, and she replied with a paragraph about respect and unpaid labor. Another client requested a small change, and she answered like they were insulting her intelligence. Small deadlines started slipping because she was busy composing perfect clapbacks instead of doing work. One morning, she forgot a call entirely, then claimed nobody reminded her, like reminders were a service. I watched her scroll through her messages looking for someone to blame, and she didn't look at herself. She began writing longer emails to explain shorter mistakes, which is how you lose people faster. Meanwhile, my silence stayed steady, and that steadiness started to annoy her more than a fight would. She tried sarcasm, then guilt, then coldness, and none of it worked, because I wasn't engaging anymore. A meeting invite went out with a wrong time zone, and she blamed the recipient for not confirming. A file didn't get attached, and she insisted they should have reminded her sooner. A reply landed too sharp, and she called the reaction fragile, like feelings were a moral failure. Each time I felt the itch to fix it, and each time I didn't move. She said men are useless at details, so I let her live inside her own claim. Soon she started saying unprofessional a lot, which unreliable people love to say. Client replies got shorter, and the politeness shifted from warm to careful. She read replies out loud, searching for hidden motives like it was a detective show. She couldn't accept the plain meaning, which was that people were tired. Tired people don't argue. They leave quietly, and they do it with polite wording. By the second month, she stayed up late, typing, deleting, rewriting, repeating the same loop. The apartment got quieter in a tense way because even her jokes thinned out. She still blamed men, but the line had less power when her inbox stopped smiling back. One afternoon, she took a call in the living room while I worked at the table. The client asked one simple clarification, and Mara turned it into a speech about expectations. There was a long silence, and you can hear the moment someone decides not to negotiate. Afterwards, she stormed into the kitchen and said they acted like she was unreliable. I kept my voice flat and said that sounded rough because I wasn't feeding her drama. Then the retainer ended, not with the fight, but with a polite goodbye email. She reread it 3 times and tried to laugh, but the laugh sounded thin and cracked. She said it was because she was a woman, because that story felt safer than the alternative. I didn't answer because answering would put me back on the hook for fixing her narrative. Our mom called that weekend, and Mara said everything was fine in a voice too loud to be true. After the call, she told me Mom thinks I should help her more again. I said she was an adult, calm and simple, like stating the weather. She stared at me like reality was disrespectful. The next days, she spiraled in small ways, snapping at tiny inconveniences. She posted vague rants and chased validation like it could pay rent. Online applause doesn't undo real consequences, and she was learning that slowly. One night, she sat across from me and asked why I was doing this. I kept washing my mug and watched soap bubbles slide down the ceramic. She said I used to help, and the words sounded like I owed her by default. I reminded her what she said at dinner, the fork, the supervision line, the laugh it got. She tried to call it a joke, but her eyes didn't match the defense. I told her it sounded like what she meant, and I didn't raise my voice. Raising your voice gives people a stage, and I wasn't giving her a stage anymore. She went quiet after that, the kind of quiet that isn't peace, just a pause before denial. Work kept slipping, not because she lacked skill, but because she fought feedback on instinct. People remember how you make them feel, and she made them feel corrected and drained. New clients didn't show up, old contacts stayed distant, and her calendar stopped looking impressive. One night, she asked me to help set up a tone checker, then caught herself and changed the subject. I watched her fight the urge to ask because asking would admit she needed me again. She started talking about moving out again, not as a plan, but as a threat to regain control. I didn't react because threats only work on people who are scared of losing you. The more I stayed calm, the more she looked for a bigger lever to pull, and that's when she went for guilt. She reminded me of childhood favors, of rides I'd given, of times she'd defended me at school. I listened, nodded, and still didn't step back into the editor role because I wasn't trading peace for debt. She started applying for a full-time role again, pretending freelancing was a choice, not a collapse. I watched her rewrite her resume 10 times, trying to make it sound fearless instead of frantic. She asked me one afternoon if I knew anyone hiring, and I did, which made it awkward. My friend Ryan managed a team at a mid-sized brand company and needed a marketing coordinator. I mentioned Mara because I'm not a villain, and Ryan agreed to a screening call. Mara treated the call like a battle, talking fast, correcting the recruiter, name-dropping theory like credentials. Afterward, she said the interviewer seemed intimidated, which was her favorite translation for, "It didn't go well." Ryan texted me later and asked, gently, if Mara always talked like she was scoring points. I didn't defend her and I didn't trash her. I just said she was under stress. Ryan asked if she could send a short follow-up. Friendly tone, simple thanks, nothing extra. Mara drafted a message and tossed it at me with a grin, like she'd regained control. The draft was a lecture disguised as gratitude, with a line about equity and a joke about men listening better. My fingers twitched, reflex rising, old habit begging me to smooth it. I remembered the fork and the supervision word, and I handed it back untouched. I told her it looked fine because I meant it in the same way I'd meant it for weeks. She sent it and she went back to her room. Confident because confidence is easier than checking. The next day she waited for a reply, refreshing her inbox like it owed her something. That evening she came out, eyes bright, and said nothing came yet, like it was suspicious. The day after that, Ryan texted me again, and his message was short and careful. He said he liked her energy, but the follow-up felt confrontational, and he was moving on. I sat on the couch reading the text while Mara cooked pasta like nothing could touch her. She asked what I was staring at, and I showed her the screen without a word. Her face tightened, and she laughed once, sharp, like she could cut the truth into a different shape. She said Ryan was proving her point, that men punish confident women. I didn't argue because arguing would require me to care about her story more than my own peace. Later that night, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and a new draft open. The light was low and the room felt smaller than usual. Instead of tossing the laptop at me, she turned the screen slightly toward me. Her voice came out quieter and she asked how I would write it. The draft on screen had the same sharp edge, the same need to win, the same little hidden insult. For a second I could see the old loop where I smooth it and she stays safe. Then the breaker click held firm because I wasn't her supervisor and I wasn't her editor. I handed the laptop back and said I wouldn't write it. She blinked, and her face tightened, because she understood what that meant without extra words. I didn't add a speech because speeches are what she does, and I was done performing. I walked away and closed my door, and I heard typing resume. Slower now, with pauses. Tap, tap. Pause, backspace, tap, tap. Like she was finally hearing her own tone. A week later, the last decent freelance project ended with another polite goodbye email. She read it once and closed her laptop gently, like slamming it would admit she still had energy. Later, she posted about protecting her peace, but peace is what you call it when you can't admit you got shut out. Mara still tells people she's strong and independent because brand habits die slow. But she doesn't ask me to quickly look anymore, not once. Not even when she's clearly stuck. These days, she rereads sentences 5 times and rewrites them until they stop sounding like a challenge. Sometimes I pass by and see her pause before hitting send, like she's finally listening to herself. Months later, we were still sharing the apartment, but it felt like 2 separate lives with a hallway between them. Mara kept telling people she'd rebuilt everything on her own, because admitting help died is still admitting help existed. One afternoon, I got an email notification from Google Docs while I was at work and almost ignored it. The subject line said Mara had invited me to view a document called Follow-up Template V12. I clicked out of curiosity and saw a clean draft, calmer than usual, with comments in the margin. The comments weren't mine and they weren't hers, and the name on them was Devon Editor. There was an invoice attached in the doc chat, a simple PDF for professional tone review, hourly. The number wasn't huge, but it was enough to make the point land hard in my stomach. She didn't want supervision from me anymore, but she'd pay a stranger for the same thing I gave for free. A minute later, my phone buzzed with a short text from her, just 3 words with no emojis. Ignore the invite. I stared at the message, then at the doc, then at the quiet office around me. I didn't reply because replying would turn it into a conversation, and I wasn't interested in reopening it. I just declined the invite and went back to my spreadsheet like nothing happened. When I got home, she was at the table rewriting a sentence for the 5th time, jaw tight, shoulders tense. She didn't look up and I didn't say anything, because the lesson didn't need narration anymore. All I could hear was the keyboard, slow and careful, like she finally understood what details cost. For the first time, she didn't blame a gender or a system. She just stared at the sentence. A quiet "oh" slipped out, not dramatic, just the sound of understanding catching up. I kept walking to the fridge because even sympathy can turn into another job if you feed it. The room stayed calm, and that calm felt earned. Not forced, not negotiated, just real. In that moment, I realized the harshest lesson isn't shouting, it's silence plus consequences. I didn't ruin her life. I didn't set traps, and I didn't call her names. I just stopped fixing what she kept pretending didn't need fixing. She wanted to do everything herself, so I finally let her.